Hi, folks. You were Tacitus today, your pushback channel, and thank you for joining this audio live stream. I've got a few messages over the last few days from listeners saying, "Does audio mean that it's audio? And where's the footage? And where are the pickies and so on?" Now, I do some vids with pickies, by the way, but the audio ones are ones that give me the flexibility to just jump on at any time and knock out a video, or if I've got to sit down and do production work, gather pictures and footage and so on, then it takes a lot longer, and I can't react spontaneously, and I've got other things to do. I've got no team working for me on this. Anyway, what's the subject of this essay? Something I've noticed recently is the amount of frantic hand-wringing and so on from activist Jewish groups around the world. Now, it could be, anywhere around, or the Western world, I should say. And they could be in Europe and Britain, United States, and so on, all over the place, Canada and the like. And they all seem to be sort of have jumped up at the same time with pretty much the same talking points, the same concerns, and the same points of anguish, if you will. The bottom line is this, that and I'm paraphrasing here, of course, but the Jewish activists say that the Judaism is under great threat at the moment and hasn't been under such a threat for a long time. And they need to, they can't allow others to shape the narrative about anything that may directly or indirectly affect Jews anywhere, the Jewish diaspora, anywhere in the world where they may be. And so it's incumbent on the Jewish diaspora, and particularly the more activists among them, to get out in front of the narrative, to shape it, to craft it, to tell us what we should and shouldn't, the rest of us what we should and shouldn't hear or see or think or believe, and to censor voices that may not be approved of by the Jewish activist class, and so on. But also that Jewish people should should act in the interest of their own diaspora, no matter where they are in the world, and no matter how many generations, of Western, as in, Christian sort of nations, or hitherto Christian nations they were born. No matter how many generations, that doesn't matter. They should act only and absolutely in the interest of the Jewish diaspora. And the idea that you're a Jewish American or Jewish English or something, that's nonsense, is now being put about. You're Jewish, and that is your first and only and primary loyalty. And again, it doesn't matter how long your grandparents could have emigrated to America or Britain or, I don't know, Australia or wherever, a Christian country, or your great-grandparents or great-great-grand, that's irrelevant. And if we're going back to, say, some of the earlier pogroms in Eastern Europe and Russia and so on, back in the Tsarist days, then there we're talking 1860s type emigration. So we're talking in some cases, great-great-grandparents being born in America and so on. But put that aside. It doesn't matter. You can be 3 or 4 generations American born, but if you're Jewish, then your only loyalty and your first loyalty is to the Jewish diaspora, and not per se to Israel, although to Israel, the Zionist sort of state is the ethno state there, but to Jewish interests anywhere in the world where they may be. So, and that's sort of a first thing to consider. The next thing to consider is in Jewish folklore, but in fact, it's a matter of casting concrete belief. The view again, more at the activist end of things, but even so, even Jews, you may sort of only attend the synagogue at major events like Passover or something like that. They're still caught up in this, certainly the ones I've spoken to. And that view is that the Holocaust occurred, well, because of the views of the Nazis and so on, but the real the equal co-conspirators, Hitler's co-conspirators, if you will, were the other Christian countries that wouldn't accept mass Jewish immigration to those countries. So the view is, and it's a faulty one, and I'll come back to that in a minute, but the folklore view is that if if places like America and Britain and so on had taken in mass Jewish immigration from Europe, then there would have been no Jews in Europe. They'd all left and gone to America. Therefore, because America did not accept mass Jewish immigration, then America is equally culpable, or the rest of Christendom, if you will, is equally culpable to what the Nazis did. So the difference between Christian Gentiles in America and the actual Nazis, so the difference isn't really that much. They're kind of both, one's maybe a little bit more guilty of the Holocaust and everything, but the others follow pretty close behind. And so this is something that can never be allowed, as the Jewish activists see it, never allowed to happen again. There can be no restriction of any type, of any kind, anywhere in the world on immigration, because Jews may need to leave wherever they are, at any place at any time, to go to another place for their own safety. Now, they can't get a special carve out, so, well, no one else is allowed to do it, only us Jews. That wouldn't work. The optics would be terrible on that. They can't have an idea of, they can't have a skilled migration thing, because then only the most skilled Jews could migrate, in the same way as that happened in the 1930s from Germany or Central Europe. Guys like Einstein were okay to get travel visas and entry visas to the United States or elsewhere around the West, but and there was only 400,000 Jews in Germany out of a population of 80 million. So there weren't a lot of Jews in Germany, but you give or take about half, were skilled, especially in science and academia generally, and so on. And so a lot of those were able to go to, for example, United States or Britain. But the rest, like the guy who owned the corner delicatessen, or the guy who was just a tailor, or say a cloth merchant or something like that, they had no hope. Now, the main reason, or one of the reasons, and it's a key one that the Jews tend to ignore, was that the Great Depression was on at the time, and unemployment in America was already 30%. So all immigration pretty much was shut down, and only the most skilled of the skilled could get in. Who could bring real value or expertise with them. But for just the ordinary sort of dude in the street, they couldn't get a visa to go to America or anywhere else, because of the Great Depression, the massive unemployment. So that was the key, or among the key reasons. It's put down by the Jewish activists. It was anti-Semitism. It was Hitler and Nazi swastika. No, it wasn't. That wasn't the issue. Did anti-Jewish attitudes play some sort of role in some way? That's possible, and that can't be ruled out. But the Great Depression meant that all immigration was shut down. Now, the Jewish activists said, well, that doesn't matter. Fuck the Great Depression. We were our people were being threatened, and we needed to move out, and we need that facility to move wherever we want, whenever we want, at any time, for any reason, and we need that in place. So if you Gentile Christian countries want to shut down mass immigration, then okay, you're shutting down mass immigration from Africa, or I don't know, fucking Bangladesh or something, but you're also shutting down our escape route, and that we can't allow. And that's what we're going to, we need to stop you on this, because if we don't stop you, if we don't control the narrative here, then another Hitler is always around the corner. This is the third sort of part of the Jewish folklore thing, that another Hitler is just around the corner. It could be anywhere, under any bed or in any closet or around any corner. And therefore, if the Jews lose control of the narrative, the social narrative around social structure, family structure, migration, etc. So if the Jewish media and Hollywood and the propaganda output machine, if they lose control of that, or their message is failing to get cut through, then in their sort of frazzled consciousness, then this means that the door is wide open for Hitler to walk through it at any time, and there's always another Hitler around the corner, and therefore this would facilitate and allow Hitler to run right. If Hitler does appear, then it's going to be pogroms and holocausts all over again, such as the Jewish attitude. Now, I don't suppose you could get a more sort of hand-wringing, anxious, fatalist view of the world. But there you have it. And I've spoken to Jewish people. Some of them, have received a first-class education, and yet they say, look, everyone should have known what Hitler was going to do, and none of the Gentile Christian countries stopped him. And because they didn't stop him, and they should have, because everyone should have known, then this is, everyone should have known, as soon as 1920, everyone should have known what Hitler was going to do. How the fuck would they have known? Anyway, they should have known, and they didn't. They should have stopped Hitler. They didn't stop Hitler. That means they're equally culpable to what then happened thereafter. Now, that's obviously a load of nonsense, but such is the attitude of this, as I assess it, in my view. This is the attitude of the Jewish activist class. Now, there was a journalist called Melanie Phillips. I think it was her grandparents came to Britain I think they were from Russia or Poland or somewhere in Eastern Europe. Anyway, came to Britain and settled there. So, as I understand, at least, Miss Phillips' parents were born in Britain, and she was born in Britain, I think, in the 1930s, somewhere around there. Now, she, probably more than only 50s. Nonetheless, she was born in Britain, so second generation British born, but she's out in the public domain saying, no, my first, being Jewish, my first loyalty is to the Jewish diaspora. And there should be no question of that. You're Jewish, your loyalty is to Jew. I'm not an English Jew, I'm a Jew, who just happens to live in England. Now, if people have a view that firm about their loyalties, should they be given a vote should they be even given citizenship or the vote or something like that? I don't know what the answer is there. But if your loyalty is so utterly devout and total to the Jewish diaspora and not to the British state, then as you're born there and you're a citizen, then one should question whether or not citizenship should be issued to people that believe they have no loyalty to the state that they live in. I could go back to 1,000 years and say, well, my antecedents were part of the Normans that went over to England in 1066, for example. Do I run around saying my loyalties to France or to Normans or Normandy or the province of France, Normandy, or to William the Conqueror? No, of course. My loyalty, first, second, third, and last, is to Australia, Australian citizens, and the Australian institutions, and so on. That's my loyalty, and so it should be, and so it must be. So the idea that people can say, well, we're just unique, we're the Jewish diaspora, we don't have to give any such loyalty, of course, is I think something that we should question and should consider in the light of what's said. Now, if any other, if white people said that, if that was, well, we're white Christians and we have to put that first and put everything else second, the screams and the cries and the shouts of Nazi and swastika and fascist would be reverberating around the globe at this very minute. But when the Jewish diaspora does it, that's considered, well, nothing to see here, nothing to even comment on. Why would we even notice something? Or nothing to see here. And that just shows the outrageous double standard, not only of the Jewish media class, but of the political class generally. Now, there are other things. There's a Jewish leadership conference recently, and there were the Berie Weiss, who's Jewish and who's the I'm not sure. I think she's the editor-in-chief of now CBS News, who recently appointed there. And she's made a number of pronouncements, and I'll paraphrase a few of them and sort of put them together. She was speaking at the Jewish Leadership Conference, but also she's made public statements and proclamations on this subject. Her general thrust is, again, I'm paraphrasing here, is that the Jewish media machine and the Jewish Overton window control machine as to what's acceptable or unacceptable discourse, that the Jews, as she sees it, are losing control of the narrative, the public narrative, or the narrative in the public domain. And this is for a number of reasons. One, there's been a large increase in Islamic folks coming to the West, and also Islamic agitators and troublemaking Palestine, all this sort of stuff. And it's been creating a view that the Jews are the oppressors because they're white. The Jews are the oppressors, and the Palestinians, the Arabs, the Islamic folks, the victims being, the brown victims being oppressed by the white folk. So this has caused a loss of moral control and moral authority that the Jews previously had, and they view this as being actually quite dire. This loss of control of the narrative, so they can't scream. They can't at the Palestinians. They can't scream, Nazi, Hitler, fascist, swastika. They can't scream that. It has no effect. It's irrelevant to that. And so, what do they do? It's a problem, and they're concerned that they've lost that moral overlordship of the general narrative, which I would argue they have. That doesn't. I mean, the Palestinian propaganda machines actually has been quite good. They've managed to peddle misinformation on a grand scale, but that doesn't matter. The only thing that matters is they've undermined the moral authority of the Jewish propaganda machine, and this is what the Jews perceive, the Jewish actors perceive as a great threat. But they're caught in a bind because they can't blame the brown people and say, well, you brown people did it. So as we see in Australia at the moment, the Jewish actors are very concerned about this loss of the moral authority, loss, as they would see it, control of the narrative, and because they had great power in there, they just scream Nazi at anybody. Is Hitler your best mate, you fucking Nazi? And that's enough to silence most others. And even if it doesn't silence, it gives the Jewish finger pointer that higher moral authority. The other guy's just Hitler, don't listen to him. And that's been eroded or substantially minimized, I would argue, with the Palestinian counter propaganda machine. Now in Australia, this is concerned quite reasonably, by the way, quite understandably, has concerned the Jewish activist class, and they are constantly as I understand it, constantly pressing the governments, local and federal, to make some sort of show of saying we're going to stamp out anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism is not acceptable, and we're going to jump all over it. And anybody looks like they've even might have made a Sieg Heil thing, that's it, off to prison for them. And we're tough on this. We're hairy-chested motherfuckers when it comes to stamping out anti-Semitism. But the anti-Semitism, certainly that I've seen anyway, has all come from the Arabic, Islamic, Palestinian crowd who've made some outrageous anti-Semitic statements that wouldn't be accepted or tolerated or allowed to pass unchallenged in any other circumstances. But it won't work if you go chasing the brown people. The optics just won't allow for that. Certainly not now, anyway. Are you Islamic phobic, Islamophobia? That's so really the Jews are in a tight corner on this one, in a propaganda optics type sense. So they have, again, that they want public shows of we won't tolerate anti-Semitism. We're tough on anti-Semitism, but the only acceptable people for jumping on anti-Semitism are straight white male Christians. They're the only ones. So we've got this absurd thing where actors are dressed up in black uniforms, parading up down for the cameras, pretending to be Nazis or neo-Nazis, as the buzz phrase. Neo-Nazis, and they parade. And then someone said, "What's that?" I saw that guy do what looked like a Nazi salute. That's it, arrest the motherfucker. And what about the things that the Palestinian protesters did and said, and the utterances they made, and the anti-Jewish slogans and utterances and phrases and so on. No, we're not going to do anything about that. We can't. They're brown people, they're Islamic. We can't do it. So what we'll do is we'll just pretend the straight white male Christians did it, and we'll put them in prison. There you go. That'll show how tough we are. So that's how desperate and ridiculous and absurd the situation is. And somehow we're now to believe, in Britain and Australia and elsewhere, that the whole society, the whole of the country is awash with neo-Nazis that are goose-stepping and zig-heiling and waving swastikas and so on. and then as they parade up and down for the cameras, the police can arrive and go, yeah, we're fucking motherfucking tough guys. We're going to put those Nazis in. And when that's all a created and invented load of bullshit. But the situation is, and as Bereaved Vice has said this is in the Jewish Leadership Conference, along with other Ben Shapiro, for example, is up on stage with it, is to say, look, we've effectively lost control, not lost control of the narrative. We're not getting the cut through, and we've lost some of the moral authority due to this Palestinian stuff. We've lost some of the moral authority that our messaging machine had. And if we lose even a little bit of the control and power of our messaging machine, whether it's via Hollywood or the mainstream news, or if we lose any of that, then that means people may be encouraged to sort of stray in other directions that we can't control. And then, hey presto, 1 million Hitlers will appear. Oh no, Nazis! And so they view this with fear and trepidation and all sorts of hand wringing and chewing of fingernails and the like. You can, if you try and look at their activist viewpoint of the world, you can kind of see what they think. If we don't have control of the narrative, then seconds later Hitler will appear. And while you've got that degree of anxious paranoia, then anything becomes possible. There'll be a Hitler and 100 Hitlers, 1 million Hitlers, 10,000 billion Hitler. And once you get sort of to that anxious, hyperventilating sort of imaginary fantasy perception of some disaster, looming disaster, it becomes it's a permanent catastrophe in the making. And this is where it's going. But my concern with this is why would people who, again, have come to America in the 1860s, they're antecedents, they come to America in the 1860s. So we're talking 3 or 4 generations US born and saying, no, I'm not American, I'm Jewish. Or 3 or 4 generations British born. No, I'm not British, I'm English, I'm Jewish. And that this is being reflected all over the Western world. And, it doesn't matter where it is, Canada, Australia. And that is I think, concerning. So where is this going to lead us? Bereaved Vice, again, as I understand her position, is we have to decide and determine the confines of speech. We have to determine what is allowable and not allowable. We have to determine what can be discussed and cannot be discussed. Sure, we're going to wrap it up in saying, well, we only tell the truth, that sort of thing. But the reality is we have to produce a truth that uniquely and absolutely protects the Jewish diaspora and all our worst fears and fantasies. And if we don't have that power to do it, or do not succeed in doing it, then we're in mortal and omnipresent danger. And is it wise to have people who are that anxious about everything around them in the future controlling what we can say and hear and think? I don't know that it is. You've been a Tacitus today, your Pushback channel, and thank you for listening.